Welcome back. I am so excited to be back with you all today and to have this amazing guest on, Sarah Jansel. So Sarah has been nicknamed the Shopify Queen, which Sarah, I just love that. So thank you for coming on with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Not self-proclaimed. It was given to me. But
And
I'll own it.
modest. Yeah, own it. That's amazing. So Sarah and I met online on social media. We were in different mastermind groups together in our network. Just like we kept seeing Sarah pop up. And so I was so excited to not only get to connect with Sarah, but also be able to work with her in helping her get out her message on beliefs, which we were going to talk about today, and helping her to create her keynote and get it out there. So I want to share a little bit more about Sarah. So as I mentioned, has been nicknamed the Shopify Queen. We're going to learn more about why that is. And Sarah is a speaker, a podcaster, and the CEO of Jansel & Co., where she and her team build, brand, and grow awesome websites on Shopify and Kajabi. So Sarah began her entrepreneur journey launching a fashion boutique in 2018. And she spent 25 years working in business ops and human resources, working in various leadership roles, which we know we love to talk about leadership on here, for different large organizations. So excited to dive in with you, Sarah. I love your intro, but I also love to hear it from my guests themselves. So can you just share a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. Thanks, Julie. I'm super pumped to be here. And I feel like I want to, definitely sing your praises and having the opportunity to work together. So excited to dive into that. A little bit about me. So, prior to being the Shopify Queen, I worked 20 plus years in corporate. So business, HR, operations, did some sales stints as well. And that was really what I did for many years: banks, consulting firms, tech companies. And there was a period of time in there where I'd always kind of had this entrepreneurial calling, like a little feather in the ear, lots of ideas, never really actioned them, never really felt like I could or should action them because, I was doing great climbing the corporate ladder, and got to my last role at a tech company and was loving it, had a great job, but still just really felt this nagging feeling like there was something more for me and something more creative, I would say. So I started a fashion boutique in 2017, 2018 is when it launched, and started running that and realized very quickly there was a whole world of opportunity out there that I had never been exposed to. Just the entrepreneurial community, the excitement, of course, of traveling around and curating collections for fashion and meeting all kinds of really interesting people and just starting to dive into business. And as part of that, I obviously was an online boutique and did an awful lot of research around where I should host my fashion business. And Shopify was definitely top of the list. There were others that I looked at, but I just knew that Shopify was the number one, and it seemed to have all the bells and whistles that I was looking for. So I spent about 3.5 years running that business, learning everything there was to know, YouTube University, self-taught around the Shopify space. But what I bring to that space is really all of the experiences that I had before around being a leader and understanding how to build, brand, and grow businesses, but also having sort of the inside track on having run a business and understanding how the technology will really power the end user, which is really what's most important, is our customer. So that brought me into deciding in 2020 to actually take the leap when suddenly there were businesses that were scrambling to get online, and I was still working my VP job and looking to actually scale the fashion biz, but realized there was a better opportunity and decided to just go all in, take the risk, made the leap, and very quickly left my job after a few clients. And so here we are today, growing and helping more clients. And yeah, just really excited to be doing something a little more creative like I had sort of dreamed of, and now getting out and telling people about how they can do that too.
Oh my, there's so many things I want to dive in. Thank you for sharing that and giving that context. There's so many things I want to dive into. So first, I just want to start with very foundational for people who aren't really familiar with what Shopify is. You just explained it a little bit, but tell us about what is Shopify and who uses it.
Absolutely. So Shopify, and I don't work for them, I am a partner. I'm going to give you my sales pitch because I truly believe in the platform. I really call it a one-stop shop platform. So when people are looking to get out there and really build a website or a business, they are thinking about a multitude of things, or if they haven't already, they're going to start to think about that once they dive in. So, obviously inventory management, how am I going to host that product? How am I going to ship that product? How am I going to make it easy for consumers to order from me? What about like security? What about my website? Like all of the things that go in, and Shopify offers that all in a one-stop shop platform. But over and above that, what really sold me was the opportunity that Shopify looks at hosting the products that you want to sell as being able to distribute those throughout a multitude of channels. And I'm going to call them sales channels. So a sales channel is really somewhere where you can actually sell your products through. And some examples of where I really wanted to do that, even though it was an online business and everyone says, oh, I'm just going to be online. And I'm like, wait a few months because you're going to get asked to do pop-up shops or maybe speaking opportunities or attend events. And there's going to be different ways to be able to market and sell your products. So, I loved that I could use my phone and literally have a point of sale on there and, sell my products or sell my products on Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest or all of those things. So your website is really one place that you want to show up. And the whole point of this is making it easy for the consumer to pull on your products. And so that's why I really love Shopify. There's like a million reasons we could get into and I could like tech nerd out, but I won't bore your audience with that. But I just really think that they're strong in that area. And I think there's also over the past number of years, they've been around for a while. There's a lot of trust, in Shopify and the platform and the security and all of the things that they offer.
I love that too. And for somebody who has not really been in the product space yet, like myself, I love learning about this because for a few reasons. First of all, myself, I'm like, ooh, I could see myself doing products down the road. So obviously, Sarah, we're going to stay connected.
Yeah.
But then also a lot of my clients too, specifically when I'm working with, my entrepreneur, small business clients who want to do speaking, like I find that when people start to get out there and use their voice and build their brand with their thought leadership, all of a sudden it starts to grow. And it's like, ooh, they want to have a talk and they want to have a book and they want to have products like something we've talked about, like journals or different courses that have things to go with them. And so it kind of all comes together. So I love that you're this expert in this space. And something that popped up for me when we first met and had a conversation, and just again now when you were telling your story, is the word pivot, which is really interesting because it's a word that you and I have talked about before when you gave your talk and people said the word pivot kept coming up. And as you were just telling your story again, it's like, oh, that just came up so strongly for me that in your journey, you embraced the pivot and kind of leaned into it. Tell me a little bit more about, like, how did you get the confidence, the courage, like to make these changes that you've made from when you switched, in different positions within corporate into an entrepreneur and then switching that, like, how did you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I feel, I've definitely been an embracer of change, that's for sure. And more of a like, I'd rather be at the front end of that than the back end of that. And just that overall curiosity, I think, has really helped me. I would consider myself actually a bit of an underdog having, gotten into corporate. And, in some cases, looking back now, I'm like, man, and I talk about this in my speech, it's almost like, it's not that I didn't have any business being in those roles, but, I think what I brought to the table that was different from someone who may have had more experience than me was this resourcefulness and this sort of thinking and ability to think, somebody's going to tell me that I can't do something or, maybe I don't have the experience and things like that. Had this like air about me where it was like, well, I'll figure out a way, right? And like, there's not just one way to do things. And, I'll go and find an answer or I'll find an alternate route to do that. And I think it's a lot of that that's really served me in my life and careers. And like one of the number one things I used to get told was that, hey, Sarah, you're like really resourceful or you get stuff done. I'll put air quotations around that. And I do think that's code a lot of times for, I just really was interested in serving up a better life for myself. Like I came from a family that didn't have a lot of money. I came from a mom who really struggled with her health and her mental wellness and all of those things. And at a very young age, you know this, Julie, I found myself out on my own at 16, like just boom, one day. And I really had this feeling that was within me that was like, this isn't going to be my life. Like, this is not going to be where I'm going to end up. And I'm going to have to be creative to figure out another way to get around this problem and to serve up a life for me that I really saw for myself, which, had a lot of success and happiness and all the things that everybody really craves in their life. And so I think that moment was very pivotal in helping me feel like, how do I solve this problem? Instead of worrying about the problem, it catapulted me into how do I solve this problem? And I think that really carried over the years for me in different fashions. Even though it was maybe a bit of a trauma response, I would say looking back on that now, I think it's actually been very positive in how it's served me and how it's almost been like great life training for how to get through these things. So I think there's a couple of things there. I think it's being resourceful, but it does definitely come from, a place of needing to be resourceful.
Yeah, and that story that you shared, I remember one of our first calls where we were diving in and trying to get clear on your story and who you are and your message and what is it that you want to bring out and use your voice more to help other people with. Because this is a big thing I believe is that we all have a story and a skill and an audience that we can serve with our message, that we're the only ones that can deliver and only the way that we can. And so I love digging into that. And when you shared this on one of our first calls of what happened to you at 16, finding yourself like without a home, and it's still the way that you said it was almost so casual, Sarah, because when you said it, it was like, wait, it's like that's your story and you've owned your story. But for a lot of people, they can't even fathom that. And you just have this like strength and resilience that I see whenever you talk about it. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like that's a huge thing. Right. And so I love that you're now owning this and like sharing it more and more. Tell us about like what were the first thoughts that you had, that like catalyst, that moment that happened where, and share a little bit more about that story if you're open to it. Like what was that thing that happened and what were the first thoughts that you had when this situation happened?
Yeah. So for those that are listening out there and might be part of your audience, Julie, where they feel like maybe they're sitting on something, but they're not comfortable talking about that. I mean, I will be fully transparent that it has only been probably the last 6 months, probably since we've been working together, that I have actually felt like I am sitting on something and it is selfish to hold this back. Whereas, previous to that, I felt very embarrassed about what happened to me. And I was worried that people would judge me knowing what happened, because I had to quit high school and, I had to figure out a job and I had to put myself through night school and like later figured it out. Right. So there was a lot of stuff, I would say, that I carried around with me. And, I think that probably was doing a disservice to others because they didn't really know me, you know what I mean, as well as I probably needed them to, but it came from a place of just wanting to be seen as someone who could figure that out, right? So I feel like I'll just say that because I think sometimes we hold on to a lot of things, and now I feel very empowered by this message because I'm like, I've been out and I've talked about it, and I can't tell you how many people who've come up to me that are like, man, I went through the same thing, and I'm like, no way, right? So no matter what you've gone through, I feel like that really exists out there. But yeah, I would say in terms of the story, yeah, you're right. I probably, I've said I need to be a bit more dramatic about how I tell that. Almost a little desensitized to that. So, but yeah, my mom wasn't well. I had confronted her about that. I will say I love my mom. But she just had a really dark period and just couldn't deal with what was going on, and her reaction to life and being able to deal with it was just to not and push everybody away that wanted to try to help her. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're kind of feeling like things aren't going well, sometimes that's what we do. And so I was a product of that, unfortunately. And so I'm at a friend's house and she drives up her car and I'm talking to the friend and I'm like taken aback, like, what is my mom doing here? Because it was very out of character for her to leave the house and do certain things at that period of time. And I remember my friend's mom and the friend's mom was like, got right up off the couch and went outside, and I was kind of frozen on the inside. And, looking at the friend, like, I think I'm in trouble or like something's going on. And my mom and her had this like little altercation, and my mom got out of the car and went to the back, literally pulled out a garbage bag of my belongings and hoofed it onto the lawn. And it was in that moment, and I still get chills. Like, I'm still getting goosebumps as I tell you that, because it's like I relive it a little bit every time. But I remember thinking, holy smokes, like this is it. Like, I literally need to figure this out now. And I'd be lying if I said there weren't a lot of moments where I had to grow up fast over the years. Based on what I'm telling you, that moment didn't just come out of nowhere. There were a lot of things leading up to that probably gave me the strength without me knowing it. But in that moment, I was working on a lot of things. I was into art history. I was into fashion. I was painting murals on bank walls. I was like in fashion shows. Like, there were all these creative things I was doing. And I knew, and again, this is like where trauma does funny things to people. I knew that like that stuff just wasn't going to play a space for me, but that I didn't want to compromise my life. And I literally have the words that were said in my mind, wherever they came from, like, this is not my life. And like any 16-year-old, I was obviously a basket case when that happened. But I very quickly had to jump into, how am I going to save this? And for me, you think, wow, like corporate, 20 years, like I've got a plethora of, diplomas on my wall, MBA, like pro side, change management, like all the things. And it was a lot of the innerness in me that was like, well, I need to run to safety and security. I don't have that. And, I need that. And so that really propelled me into the direction that I was in. And where the fashion and all the things kind of crept in over the years was around me still knowing that like I wasn't going to let go of my dream. It just couldn't pay the bills. Like at 16, I wasn't going to be, making bank on, painting something on a mural, right? So I had to find another way to do that. But as the years continued on and into my 30s, that little voice continued to just get so loud for me that I almost couldn't ignore it anymore, and just knew that I needed to do something about it. I just wasn't sure what that would look like until really the pandemic had hit, and I'd taken a few steps forward.
Oh my goodness. And every time I've heard your story a few times, and I get goosebumps every time you tell it too, because it's just to even fathom as an adult something like that happening. Like you said, it's this trauma thing, but as an adolescent at 16-year-old girl, nonetheless, all the things going on. And what I find so amazing about the story, Sarah, is that just like what you said, you took that and you go, this is not going to define me. And it's not going to hold me back. Like, now you're using it. And it ties into what you said that I love that you shared about these things that we have shame around, and we try so hard to cover up. And I see this so much within corporate, within entrepreneurs. Like, it's really a lot of people that they try so hard to cover up the pieces of themselves that made them who they are because of that shame. And in doing so, I find that we really lose ourselves. And we've worked so hard to build up this wall and this persona of who we are. We can handle anything, right? Sarah's got it. Sarah's going to figure it out. And inside, you might have been crumbling. I've shared this a little bit of my story when I was in those moments where I just felt like everyone was like, oh, she's got it all together. She's got it all together. And inside, you're like just barely staying afloat. And sometimes when we bring that to the light and we are open more about it, we free ourselves, and you open up a conversation for other people that you're helping people with your message.
Yeah. And I love that you're touching on that, because there's literally a slide, and I think I've shown you this, but if I haven't, it's like we won the Canadian HR of the Year award. It was like I literally was on the absolute top of my game. And there were so many amazing things going on with my team, with my company, with all those things. And I will say, yes, I'm an entrepreneur now, but thank God for that corporate career I had, because it saved me in a lot of ways. But at the top of my game, and I have that picture, and I think you might have commented even, Julie, it's like I look dead in the eyes. And it's because while so many things were happening, and on the outside, I looked very successful, and I was. But on the inside, I felt absolutely terrible. And it was because I knew that I was doing things and that, you know, if I continued to do those things, I was going to have a life of just kind of going against my grain. And I had chased after that thing that I needed, which was safety and security. And I was there, like I had it. And I was literally trying to just take a big piece of me and put it in a box. And nobody knew about it and nobody understood it. And it had been so long that I couldn't even in those moments find the words for like, how do I actually bring all of myself to my current state? And how do I use that to, you know, make everything okay? Because it just wasn't for me in those moments. And I think it wasn't until I actually left my corporate job that I understood, oh my gosh, like I was in so much pain and nobody knew it. And now that I have some time with myself and I have to figure out, you know, kind of how to make my own machine go, it was like, whoa, okay, there are a lot of things here that I quote again, air quotes, didn't have to deal with in a corporate environment because I was rewarded for certain behaviors and activities that was no longer going to serve me. And I needed to just bring my whole self to what I was doing if I was going to feel good about it. And so I think there's a lot of people who are in that place, whether the part they're hiding is small or big, but the small thing can start to feel really big if you just leave it alone. It's like Pandora's box is how I would describe it.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. All the things I want to like take all of the things you just said and like rewind and like keep replaying it for people, because I work with, you know, so many leaders, high performers, like people who are high achievers. That's who I'm working with. And oftentimes what I find, right, is we've achieved, and I always say this is like, you get all these, you know, I'm going to get another certification. I'm going to get another recognition. I'm going to, you know, get that next title, the next promotion. I'm going to get that next like accolade. And we're chasing all of this external validation. Mm-hmm. And we still never feel like it's enough because we're not addressing what's really going on for ourselves. And what I always say is, I see this whatever type of role you're in, it can transcend whatever, if you're in corporate in your own business. But when you move into entrepreneurship, and I think you just hit on this, like I always have said, you have to now face like the deepest, darkest parts of yourself.
Yep.
Because it is harder. You don't necessarily get the same pat on the back. You don't necessarily get the same, oh, I got another certification and, you know, maybe a little raise for that or recognition. Like you've got to like sweat and like you have to have grit and you've got to go through. And I say like you like hold up a mirror to like the deepest parts of yourself if you want to be successful in it and be a fulfilled human. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can't agree with you more. Like nobody really talks about the personal development that goes along with the professional and how you need to embrace that, because, you know, nobody just ran a company overnight that was successful. And half the time it's not even about that. Like, you know, in my line of business, this is what really encouraged me. And then like, we can talk about how, you know, you and I kind of worked together and then all of this started to come to play. Cause it's like, I got into the speaking thing, not even thinking that this was going to be the message. I just knew that I needed to get out there. But I think there's a lot of times, you know, people are driven to want to be entrepreneurs and do other things, but then they are like, man, I can't deal with this, because it's like the heat gets turned on a little bit. And I feel like that's for very good reason, right? Because it means that the heat's turned on because there's something there that you just haven't dealt with. And so, you know, I do feel like we need to talk about that a little bit more and also embrace that, because there needs to be some level of acceptance, because success typically doesn't always just look like I want to make $1 million. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot more depth to that, but it can be oftentimes disguised by big goals like that. Not to say that those aren't legit goals, for sure they are, and like, let's do that. But a lot of the entrepreneurs that I talk to who come in that want to build a website, you know, and you're like, how does this connect? Like, you building websites. It's like, no, man, we're not just building websites. You know, what we're doing is we're talking to entrepreneurs who are probably a former version of themselves. Like, their ideal client is them, and they were in pain, or they needed something, or there's some sort of transformation that they've been in, which has propelled them typically to do the thing that they want to do. And it is that story that we try to tell them is the thing and is the reason that people are going to buy, because it's relatable. It is not just a machine. We are dealing with humans. And it's that, I think, that gave me the confidence and the courage to say, oh my God, look at these people who are putting themselves out there. And I can only imagine the things you're hearing in your line of business, Julie, right? But like, these are the things and the reasons why we need to get out and tell that, because we need some sort of connectiveness, right? That maybe we weren't getting in some other environment because we didn't have to.
What would you say, well, if you could give somebody who is in that place where, like what you said before, where you knew you were hiding parts of yourself and really not bringing your full self. There's so many people I know listening that are probably nodding their heads and thinking of, oh my goodness, that's me. What would be one thing that they could do to help them take a step forward in revealing more of who they are or facing it?
So I will use a quote that I use in my speech, which is, and I wish somebody had told me this a long time ago. What happened to me wasn't my fault. It's just what happened. And, you know, the circumstances were not my fault. But the biggest piece that's really important here is it was just a part of my path. It was not my outcome. And when we are hit with things that are really difficult or challenging or adversity or whatever it is that we're dealing with, even if it's bringing our full selves to something, whatever that version of us looks like, oftentimes when things happen and they don't go the way that we want them to, it feels extremely futile. Like, oh my God, this is it for me. Like, I'm going to cap myself. I just hit my ceiling. How could I possibly, you know, why would I ever want anybody to know this about me? And we bury it instead of feeling like, oh my God, look at this terrible thing that happened. And gosh, that was hard. But look at all the things I did to overcome that and how I'm a different person now. And that's a different flip on those things. And so I always say it feels like your outcome in the moment, but it's really not. It's really a part of our path. And my goodness, if we looked at it that way, wouldn't we have a different perspective, right? Because like today isn't the last day. Tomorrow isn't the last day. We're going to have a lot more days. And so, you know, just because we went through something hard doesn't make us a bad person.
Oh, I love that. This is just part, and I love emphasizing people, you know, it's not your fault. People have gone through, you know, very traumatic things, and also just reminding you that even for some people who haven't had such big, significant things, they might have had those smaller things that feel big to them, and reminding them, like, this is part of your path. Like, this is, I heard somebody talk one time about, I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about like climbing this mountain, and that, you know, you have all of these challenges, and every time you fall down, you think like, oh, this is it. Like, I can't keep going. When in reality, you need that because it's literally building you up stronger to be able to reach the top. And so like what you just talked about made me think of that. It's like, this isn't the end. We're not at the peak yet. These are just the things that's giving you the strength to do it. And that's so strong, that comes through in your message. And I know one of the first times we talked, when it was like, okay, I know that I have this like message on my heart that I want to get out to people, but I don't exactly know what it is, but I know I want to start speaking to more people in addition to the workshops you do on Shopify. And the word beliefs came up. And so tell us more about where that journey came from, what it was like coming to these beliefs, and tell us a little bit more about how you talk about this.
Yeah, for sure. So that's, Julie just nailed it on the head. It was like, I knew I wanted to speak, been speaking for years. It was like, hey, you know, you're a VP, like, come talk to us at this workshop or come do this. And I do a lot of business stuff, but I was like, no, I feel like there's something deeper here. And, you know, my goal was really to get out and connect with more people. And I remember one of our first meetings, and I swear, I think I like talked myself into everything. It was like, you were just asking the right questions, right? Like just challenging the status quo. Like, Julie's an awesome coach, you guys. If you're thinking about working with her, I cannot say enough about her. But sweet. I remember, oh no, but it's true. It's true. But I remember you asking me questions about, okay, well, why that? And like, you know, I was kind of throwing up, I would say, some lofty bullet ideas of what I would cover, but you were like, but like, why? You know, and it was those questions that made me start to question myself. And I started to realize, well, because there's a lot of things that have been unsaid for me. And there are a lot of things that I believe that I haven't been sharing. And I hadn't really had to couple them up in a way that like made sense to people. They were just kind of in my head. And, you know, it was after that session that we had where I was like, man, I got a lot of thinking to do here, but I had a really good direction on where I wanted to take it. And I started to think about, well, what were some of like the really pivotal points for me? Like almost like the little like stops along the way to the peak, if we use your mountain example, right? And there was kind of like, you know, a few situations that I had, and I talk about 4 specifically in my keynote speech. And it's like, you know, obviously becoming homeless at 16, and then like 6 months later when I had to quit high school, like that was a huge deal. And, you know, then fast forward to like 25 when I'm like killing it, but I'm just like really struggling to break through that corporate ladder climb that I was on. Like life had really changed for me, but it's like it was still really hard to get where I wanted to be. And then later having to leave a VP role. Like, I mean, we could have picked anything, you know, because there are other struggles for sure, but those were really big for me in those moments. And I reflected on what were the things that really got me through it. And I know we've been talking a lot about the pivot, and it was like I had to kind of go through the struggle and realize like I was bumping up against things, or I was hitting a wall, or, you know, things just weren't going my way, or, you know, the way that I would have approached things just wasn't going to continue to work for me. And those are legit things that everybody can relate to, right? Like my struggle might have been, you know, homeless, but or not, but somebody else's might be something different. But the end result of what we're going through isn't going to look any different. It's like we have to find a solution. So, you know, my beliefs, there were 4. So the first one was about the ceilings we break through are our own. And, you know, for me, time and time and time again in corporate, in entrepreneurship, in all of the things, I think we can all relate to the fact that we often put a cap on ourselves. Yes, there are things that happen externally, but the realization that we are in complete control of how we form our destiny, right? Like your podcast, like it starts with you, right? Like, and so we have to remember that we are in control. And most times when I talk to people, and even when I thought about leaving my corporate job and all the things, it was like, you know, all of the reasons that I had for not doing that over the years were really my own. Like nobody was saying things to me that I felt self-conscious about, like, what if I fail? And like, what about this? And what about that? Right? It was all me. And so I think that that's a really key piece. I talked about resourcefulness. So in business and in life. So in both of those cases, I really feel like resourcefulness is key. Like a lot of people are going to be like, damn, you know, 16 and then like you had to quit high school. Like the questions that I was being asked, which was part of the reason I hit it, you know, for so long was like, I didn't want to find the answers to like, how are you going to feed yourself and how are you going to pay the rent and things like that. And the truth is, you know, and I think anyone can relate to this, when stuff hits the fan, we get really creative. Like if 2020 was not an example of innovation coming from something disastrous, I don't know what is. And so my example is just one of like so many that I've seen. But, you know, I think we're strong enough and smart enough typically to find, you know, an alternate answer or an alternate route. And that kind of leads me to belief number 3, which is if you hit a dead end, you can just go another way. My God, how many times have I hit a dead end on things? Breaking through that corporate ladder example that I use is one of them, where I just kept telling no, like you're just not ready or you don't have the experience or whatever. And I was like, man, I keep doing all these things. I got all these diplomas. I'm doing all this work. You know, I'm like putting in all the extra time. Like what more can I possibly do? And the truth is sometimes we're so close to a problem, we often can't see that there is another solution or another way to go about things. So I feel really passionate about that. And then the key one for me, and I think whether it is leaving to be an entrepreneur or whether it is just something that you are doing in your corporate job, this isn't like a leave to be an entrepreneur speech at all. That's just, you know, kind of the path that I picked, and it's just part of my story. And now that's coming full circle, wanting to work with people in corporations, right? Knowing what I know and what I've learned today, but it's never too late to make a change. And I think, you know, I wore 20 plus years, and I even said at the beginning, I have 20 plus years in corporate and I've done all these things. And it's like we wear that like a badge of honor, and we should, because those are learned skills and experiences that are credible, you know, to people. But we often, on the flip side of that, carry that around like dead weight. And we use it as the reason not to do something. And one of the things that I talk about in my speech is the fact that I feel like I was like, man, Like, I'm going to lose all this stuff if I decide to leave, if I decide to pick another path here. I'm going to, like, all that stuff I did in corporate is just going to be gone. And I'm like, that's such a false way of looking at things. And if I had of in the moment just really thought, well, no, actually, look at all this cool stuff I did for 20 years that's going to serve me in this new capacity. I really think that attitude and that sort of pivot on what I was thinking would have really helped me to be more successful at the beginning instead of feeling like a fish out of water, right? Because something was new. Because it doesn't matter if it's entrepreneur, it doesn't matter if it's a new job, it doesn't matter if we're approaching a project or something where we just don't have the skill, but we know we need to grow it. Whatever the situation is, a lot of times we're the ones that will hold ourselves back. So those are kind of the 4 things that I like to talk about because they're just really relevant to me. And I feel like, you know, people can connect to those on so many different levels, whether it's your personal life or your professional life that are driving it.
I'm so happy that you shared those because every time I hear you talk about these 4 beliefs, it's like I sit there and I think through those beliefs that I had for myself at different points in my career and so many of the clients that I work with. And just like you said, it doesn't matter what your path is. If you're somebody who works within an organization and you feel stuck because you're like, well, I don't have this skill set for this next role or this new industry I want to get into, or if you are somebody who's like looking to make a shift into entrepreneurship or a different industry, like we put ourselves in boxes. And I see this with people all the time. We put ourselves in these boxes and we define ourselves by what we've done, what we haven't done, our title, and we forget that like I always say like, we're the captain of our ship. Like we can decide to pick a different path. We can see these things as opportunities and ways to learn instead of those things that are just going to totally knock us down. And when you can build up that, whatever you want to call it, that mindset, that resilience, the pivot, like whatever word you want to use, it's you knowing that you're not stuck. And like, that's literally why I called the podcast It Starts With You, because everything that we do starts from us believing it and seeing it and creating those opportunities. So just hearing you talk about those beliefs is so relevant. And I hope for everybody listening that you were listening to Sarah share these beliefs and really, you know, even maybe go back and listen again to what she said and see how this applies to you. So as we start to wrap up, Sarah, I love to ask my guests 2 questions to wrap things up. The first one I probably asked you when we first started working together because I usually ask this to help get to the root of what it is on your heart. But I'm going to ask it again. If you could shake people and tell them one thing, what would that thing be?
You are powerful and there may be barriers, but you can break those down. You know, whatever that looks like for you. And, you know, that's something we've been toying with, I know, on sort of the titling of my speech, because it's got a bit of a lengthy name right now. But the more I think about it, right, we talk about the pivot, but really what's at the core of that is you are powerful. Whoever you are, whoever's listening, you know what I mean, wherever the space is that you're standing in right now, there might be things that are going on, but you are in the driver's seat. And I firmly believe that. And I think, you know, a lot of people talk about confidence as being the thing that's going to help people get over that. And I'm like, yeah, but if you don't believe in yourself, confidence is never going to happen. Confidence is a skill that is learned and created and honed by taking action and steps, but it has to start with you first. It has to start with the belief that you might be able to even just take one small step that might start to build that confidence so you can move forward. So I think that's an important message for people.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of transitioned into the next question, which might be similar then is, so obviously the title of the podcast is called It Starts With You. So if you had to have one like mic drop moment to say, what does It Starts With You mean to you?
Oh, I think, good question. That's a good one, Julie. It really starts with self-acceptance. That's immediately where my mind went to. And I was like, am I going to say this out loud? Yeah, I'm going to say it out loud because I'm training myself to get over the hiding of things, right? And immediately it was self-acceptance because I think the self-acceptance and the belief things are very linked, right? So it's like accepting that like maybe I'm in a situation right now that I don't love and I might be worried about what people think of that. And I might be worried about what people are going to think of what I have to say. But it doesn't matter because it's my truth. And I think, you know, having the confidence to stand in that and be like, whatever I say is going to be okay. It doesn't mean this is going to be the same thing I say tomorrow because tomorrow I'm going to learn something else and I might answer that a little bit differently. But I think that self-acceptance acceptance of who we are, especially if you're trying to get in the speaking space. My God, are we going to have some grace for ourselves and just be like, this is where I'm at today, and it might change tomorrow, but like, this is the power in my story, is that I had to accept that these things happened to me and I'm okay, right? Like, I dusted myself off. Look at the things we can talk about on the podcast today that would have never happened 3 years ago. So I think that's a huge one for me.
Oh, I love that. And I love every time I've asked somebody this, they have a different answer, and every answer is just so beautiful. And everyone has a little bit of a different take on what it means, but every answer is just like, I might compile everybody's answer to that question, like, and make it its own episode, because I love that I could just see it. All of a sudden you had it in your head. I saw it. For those of you who are just listening, you can also check out these videos on YouTube as well, and you'll see it. I asked it, and she's like, you knew what you wanted to say, and then you said it. Self-acceptance. And what a beautiful answer, because how much do we beat ourselves up and not accept who we really are? And we can't dive into it today with our time, but something you said before about this is who you were as like a kid and as an adolescent, and you kind of got pulled away from that creativity side, and then all of a sudden you started to come back. I always tell people, like, we come back to who we are. Like, you came back to you. And that the journey that we talk about when we get people ready to, share their talks and their stories is, I always find people are just coming back to who they are at their core, rediscovering who they are. So Sarah, thank you so much. This was such an amazing conversation. I hope that all of you listening got so much. We've talked about so many amazing things. So before we wrap up, I know people are going to want to stay connected to you. So share with us, what is it that you have going on right now, and how can people stay connected with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So janselandco.com, A-N-D, Jansel and Co. It's like Hansel and Gretel, because people always ask me, how do you spell that?
Love
it's like Hansel with a J. But, there's lots of info on there. You can find more about me as a speaker, but I hang out on Instagram. So if you're looking to connect with me, my gosh, tell me you heard this podcast. Julie's awesome. What a great host she was today. So reach out, don't be a stranger, and I would love to connect.
Awesome. And we will make sure we also drop all of the links to everything in the show notes. So thank you again, and until next time.